big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
The Bears are going to be reporting to training camp soon, meaning the storylines are already crazy and they've got Twitter buzzing like crazy. There was this whole fiasco with getting training camp tickets, which I think is... the Bears got to figure that out. But if I'm going to be honest, Steve, I don't necessarily anticipate this franchise ever necessarily figuring out some of the logistical side of things. Again, there's supposedly renderings of a stadium that they've sent out to season ticket holders, a survey and all that, but it's whatever. Welcome into the Halas Beat. Usayd, Koshul, Steve, Letizia here. Check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at CFC Bears, and at Usayd Koshul. Steve, how's it going today? First off, man, I think this is the second straight episode I've seen you wear a purple shirt, so I'm sensing like a little bit of a trend here, I feel like.
To be honest, I didn't even notice, but I'm doing good. I would be doing much better if I got training camp tickets, but I got shut out. I was like 542nd in line and I still didn't get it. So yeah, they need to figure that out. But for a franchise that just figured out in 2025 that they should surround a young quarterback with an offensive-minded head coach, I don't expect them to figure out training camp or the stadium anytime soon. So it just kind of is what it is with the Bears. But other than that, I'm doing great.
Yeah, it is. The Bears are, in this spot here that I feel like we've sort of been here before, right? Where it's like, and we're not going to turn this into a conversation about the, I guess, now famous quarterback cycle, but the reality, the cycle of misery that is the Chicago Bears, but it's like, you draft Caleb Williams, pair him with Matt Eberflus, you drafted Mitch Trubisky, paired him with John Fox, purged the staff, then went ahead and hired a offensive-minded head coach, addressed weapons in the offseason, but, and now all of a sudden everyone's sort of wondering, is this 2018 on repeat? I don't necessarily think it's 2018 on repeat because, again, that 18 team did have Vic Fangio going into his fourth season as D coordinator. This group, they're starting completely new all over again. But on the idea of starting new, some of these rookies are going to be making their NFL debuts pretty soon here. And I think that when we look at the Bears rookies, right? We've seen Colson Loveland and Luther Burden and Trapeel and Turner get a lot of hype. Then you get to day 3 of the draft. And this is where, people are really high on Zay Frazier, the cornerback, which I do think he's got a shot at playing safety. There seems to be this sort of Kyle Monangai hive growing on Bears Twitter, which I think 50% of the reason that there's such a Kyle Monangai hive is because people have kind of accepted that there's not really a better option in terms of running back on the roster. We know what DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson are at this point. I know that our listeners that listen to us here, plus the Picks for Poll podcast, hear me say that all the time. There's not a better option. The guys are who they are. In between all that, you got Luke Newman as well as Ruben Hippolyte. But, handing it off to you here, which of these day 3 picks do you feel like is going to go into camp, is going to start blowing people away, is going to kind of become the off-season darling, the training camp darling per se?
Yeah, I think, first of all, day 3 picks are always a crapshoot. So you got to always have that caveat in there. But kind of to the point you were saying, a lot of the guys who make a name for themselves are just the guys that get opportunities. So I think that's part of why Kyle Monangai is probably at the top of the list, because I think running back is a position that the Bears don't have a lot at right now. Outside DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson's still a question mark. So I think he's going to get every opportunity to make an impact. So I think that's why he's at the top of my list right now for day 3 draft picks that are going to shine this week. But also, Zay Frazier, like you said, I think he's going to get an opportunity as well, potentially even working with the ones, rotating in with the ones from time to time. So I think those two guys are kind of primed to be that breakout guy. For Monangai, it's hard to really impress in training camp because, you're running back, trenches and running backs, it's hard to really stand out. It's more like a, wide receiver, cornerbacks, DBs, those guys can really stand out. But I think those two guys, I also want to throw in Ruben Hippolyte as well. I wasn't a big fan of Ruben Hippolyte in the draft. I think a lot of people were surprised when he was the pick. But to me, he's got an inside shot at that third linebacker position, and he's going to get some play. And like we talked about, I believe, last week, the linebackers that are currently on the roster are not necessarily the linebackers that Dennis Allen wants in his defense, just the style of play that they have. And Ruben Hippolyte was drafted to be that guy. So, and another thing is, he does have 4.4 speed, and speed kind of shows up in practices. You'll be able to see him running around a little bit. So I think all three of those guys have an interesting training camp, and it'll be very interesting to see kind of where they end up. But I think they all have a chance to kind of stand out. Luke Newman is a little bit harder. I think he's going to be kind of a practice squad guy. I like him, but I think he's kind of a year or two down the road before we start talking about him.
Just saying, if you are following college football, it may be time to start getting familiar with Deontay Lawson from the University of Alabama, because I would not be surprised if he's the Bears' pick next year. And you guys are going to hear, Steve and I are big draft guys as well, college football leading into the draft. So you guys are going to hear us mention these names a lot over the next couple months, right? But okay, so to me, I want to say this. I'm not going to get too deep into the Zay Frazier conversation because I feel like I've talked a ton about that. To me, the most intriguing guy is obviously going to be Luke Newman, and here's why. Because looking at the bigger picture of things, I'm not really concerned about the Bears' tackle depth at all, because you're going to have a Braxton Jones or a Karan Amagashi backing up left tackle and right tackle. I mean, for all we know, the Bears could sit there and say, all right, well, we want to go ahead. We want, Amagashi to play both tackle spots to get an idea of what he's able to go ahead and do, unless they are banking on Theo Benedict taking a big step forward. But then you look at Luke Newman here, and you're looking at a guy that, I get he was drafted to be a guard, but the big thing with him is that he does have some versatility to him, right? And you look at the measurements here too. I mean, he's only 6'4", 315, so it makes sense that he's going to end up being the backup along the interior. I know that, 6 or 7 years ago when Matt Nagy was the head coach, that Alex Bars was a free agent that I don't ever think got, or undrafted free agent that obviously never got enough opportunity because Matt Nagy was Matt Nagy, but he was someone that could pretty much play every single spot in the interior. I think Luke Newman is going to be that sort of next Alex Bars type player, or at least you hope he is, where he's not the most powerful guy at the point of attack. He is not the strongest guy in terms of his lower body strength. Could certainly add a couple pounds, 5 to 6 pounds of muscle, but he is a guy that, you can kind of plug in there with his athleticism and his traits, and he's a more than serviceable backup. Like, I know you had mentioned a couple weeks ago in one of the episodes we did that one of the big issues that we have right now with this roster, that this Bears team has, that you and I have, is that, they upgraded the O-line, but how much should they really upgrade the depth along the offensive line? Because the whole unit is a bunch of vets that are on their third or fourth team, undrafted free agents, guys that were maybe on the practice squad last year that they see some upside in and hope that they can develop, but there really isn't sort of anything real specific guaranteed. To me, of those, 4 day 3 picks that the Bears have, Luke Newman, I think, is the one that's the most worth watching.
Yeah, with Newman, it'll be interesting to see how he, because I want to see him at center a little bit, because if you want to be that backup interior offensive lineman, you kind of have to back up multiple spots. He played left tackle at Holy Cross a few years ago, transferred to Michigan State, played left guard. He hasn't really played center in his career. So if he can show the ability to play center, and I know there are some people, I believe Dane Brugler had him as a center. I can't remember if it was him or someone else, but it was one of the prominent name guys had him actually as evaluated as a center. So it'll be interesting to see if he's taking reps there, or if he's taking reps on the right side, which he's never played, kind of moving him around. It'll give us a good feel for how they feel about him as a prospect, the more they kind of move him around. Because I think they would obviously want him to kind of just take that interior job, that, 8th, maybe 9th offensive lineman position and kind of run with it. So if he's getting snaps at center, left guard, right guard, I think that's going to be a good indication of how they feel about him. And
again, with this team, the tough part is that you kind of need some of these linemen to step up here because we've seen so many different offensive line combinations over the last couple of years that we'll get to Ryan Poles later in the show, but the tough part is that Ryan Poles, to me at least, has not been very good in terms of making sure that O-line is shored up. Like, yes, he's drafted Braxton, Karan Amagaji, then went ahead and took Darno right at one point, then took Ozzie Trapilo. So you got 4 offensive linemen in 4 years, which is good, but the consistency still hasn't been there. And so you're almost kind of hoping that, this is finally the staff that's able to go ahead and find some sort of consistency for this O-line unit, because if you can't figure it out there, then everything else I feel like is kind of worthless.
I mean, the only reason we're talking about Luke Newman is because he whiffed on Ryan Bates. If Ryan Bates was the guy that Ryan Poles thought he was, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Ryan Bates would be that backup interior offensive lineman backing up all 3 interior spots. So just kind of to your point, how he has not been very good at evaluating offensive line despite being a former offensive lineman is exactly why we're even having this conversation.
I mean, I know you and I have seen the stuff on Twitter, okay, where it's kind of like, oh, so he's an ex-offensive lineman. That means he might be really good at developing offensive linemen. I think that, just because Ben Johnson's an ex-quarterback, we shouldn't necessarily say that he is really good at developing quarterbacks. Because we know what Ben Johnson, the OC, is. We don't know what Ben Johnson, the head coach, is. But staying with the offense here, the running back position is something that is going to be heavily watched in camp. Everybody sat there and was just like, all right, Ashton Jeanty. And you look at the last, what do you want to say, dude, 6 or 7 months at this point? And it's interesting because I was at the gym a couple hours before the draft was taking place. And, there all the talk about how the Jags wanted to strike a deal with Cleveland, and there was something going on there. And then, I think it was Cleveland that ended up moving up, but the Bears were also trying to move up to possibly land Ashton Jeanty, because that would have rounded out this offense, but they weren't able to do so, which I think in the long run is going to end up being a very good thing for the Bears, regardless of whether or not Ashton Jeanty has a really good career or not. And so you kind of look at this whole thing here, and they tried to take guys like Travion Henderson. Couldn't get him, but again, ended up with Luther Burden. Tried to get guys like Dylan Sampson. Couldn't do that, so he ended up with Ruben Hippolyte. Now, I think the question is this, though, are the Bears too comfortable with the running back position? I'd like to say, yeah, maybe they are a little bit comfortable going into camp, but that's going to change once, number one, they start to see what they have. Number two, those veteran cuts that are going to be taking place, the roster cuts that take place the last week of August, I really think that it's there when the Bears are going to decide, well, there's a veteran that's on the market. We're going to go ahead, we're going to bring that person in to add a little bit more juice to the running back room. Because at this point, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm Ian Cunningham, Ben Johnson, and Ryan Poles, I'm not pulling the trigger and trading for anyone, no matter who it is, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered it yourself. You were talking about all the guys that they were connected to all offseason. There was Real Smoke and Ashton Jeanty, Travion Henderson, all the guys you mentioned. So I would say they aren't comfortable with the running back room just based on everything we know about what they've been trying to do all offseason. It just hasn't worked out. So I think they realize that it is a concern. It might be a concern, but there's just, what are you going to do at this point? I do feel like they will add to the running back room at some point, over the next couple months. I don't know exactly who that's going to be. I know, Jamal Williams is a free agent. He obviously has experience with Ben Johnson. He's not a game changer, but you can bring him in. He knows the offense. He can help out Kyle Monangai, other running backs, just by being in the room. Someone like that who can maybe take a few snaps could work. I know I don't know if this has ever been a substantiated rumor, but, Kenneth Walker's name has been thrown around. The Seahawks running back is maybe a trade piece. I think that would make a lot of sense, if they in fact aren't comfortable with DeAndre Swift as the lead back. It's just a matter of how much it's going to take to actually acquire him. Is it going to be a day 2 pick or, a day 3 pick and a big contract? That's a lot to give up for a guy who's been injured in the past. But I think if you can get him at the right price in terms of draft picks and at the right price in terms of contract, that could make sense. Another guy that I've been kind of, I've been being the drum for is, Devin Singletary from the Giants. They have Tyrone Tracy, who they drafted last year, who's kind of the lead back now. They gave him a decent sized contract a few years ago. I believe they also drafted a running back. Oh, they drafted Cam Scatabo as well in the draft. So he might be the odd man out there. He could potentially be a cap casualty in training camp. And I think he's a guy who's, again, not going to be a game changer, but he brings a good presence and a veteran presence to a running back room. And you know what you're going to get from him. He's a little bit more stable, I guess I'll say, than DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is more of like a home run hitter, but the good plays are good, the bad plays are bad. Where Devin Singletary, he's going to get you 3-4 yards. He's going to pass block well. He's going to catch the ball in the backfield well, even if he's not, a sexy pick or sexy player. It could be a guy who maybe elevates that room a little bit. So in my opinion, I think they are uncomfortable with the running backs, but it's just they kind of missed out on everything. And that is, a fault of Ryan Poles. I'm not trying to absolve Ryan Poles. They didn't just miss out. That's he misjudged the market a little bit. But I think there are some avenues where you can at least, patch it over for this year. And then hopefully, as you said, draft Jeremiah Love, next year in the draft from Notre Dame, and we'll be good to go.
See, it's okay. So I was just looking up Kenneth Walker. I mean, you're talking about a guy that is 24 to 25 years old. Relatively younger, obviously still on the first contract. The Seahawks are this team that they have this sort of history of, we know when Pete Carroll was there, they were really willing to kind of run the ball. Mike McDonald is there now, and the weird part about Mike McDonald, and I'm not going to say it's a substantiated rumor, but I have a hard time believing that if Kenneth Walker is on the market and possibly available for trade, that number one, the Bears consider it. Number two, it's just a rumor that I don't necessarily think we should put a ton of stock into. And the reason being is because Mike McDonald spent time at Michigan under one Harbaugh, where, again, they love to run the ball, which, again, a little bit of a side note, is a reason that Colson Loveland is semi-underdeveloped as a receiver, because when you go to Michigan, you have to learn to run block as a tight end and not necessarily a pass catch. But then the second big thing I think is that you look at Mike McDonald, he's coming over from Baltimore, where he was with the other Harbaugh that just so happens to go ahead and really run the daylights out of the ball, right? There's a reason that the Ravens have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 good running backs on the roster. I don't necessarily think Kenneth Walker is a legit option. I like Jamal Williams, as you had mentioned, but I'm not really a big fan of taking a veteran running back and kind of putting them on the roster, even in the capacity of a rotational player. And the reason being, I think, because to me at this point, when we look at some of the players that are on some of these rookie contracts, I mean, at some point you have to start saying, maybe we should just give those guys more reps. Maybe the Bears should be giving Roschon Johnson a legitimate shot at that RB2 spot. And the reason being is I don't think people remember at all. Roschon's a guy that there was a ton of hype around him. And I remember a couple people talking about how, well, Roschon's just Roschon. He hasn't really lived up to expectations. But when we look at the last basically 2 seasons of what's transpired as long as Roschon's been on the roster, it's really been underwhelming. And he's never gotten a chance to fully prove that he can go ahead and that he can be a damn good player. And part of it is just because, again, they never really made an effort to develop players on either side of the ball. So there's still, I feel like, a ton of tread on the tires left for Roschon Johnson. And he, I think, has a chance to be a much better dual threat player compared to whatever DeAndre Swift is going to bring. Because people look at, DeAndre Swift's first, basically, 4 seasons? And the reality of it is the production was really underwhelming for a guy that was, for a lot of people, running back 1 in that 2020 draft.
Yeah, I agree with you on Roschon. I would personally, give him a chance. Let him fail, let him fail with a good coaching staff before really giving up on him. I wasn't a huge fan of Roschon when they drafted him, and I think he has been underwhelming. So I'm not going to say he's going to, if you give him a chance, he's going to, break out and be some, Pro Bowl running back or anything. But I think he's a chance to be what Jamal Williams was for Ben Johnson a few years ago. A guy who, is more of a product of the scheme, but isn't going to kill you. He's going to pick up, tough yards. He's going to, be a nice short yardage back. He can catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit. I think he definitely could be a running back 2 in a good offense. And I think that I think they should absolutely give him a chance to do that. I just threw out, Jamal Williams is just, some names connecting dots. And then back to Kenneth Walker. I think part of the, just real quick, I think part of the trade talk has been because the Seahawks do also have Zach Charbonnet, who they drafted a few years ago. They drafted Damian Martinez this year. And it's not so much are the Seahawks going to run the ball, it's are the Seahawks going to pay Kenneth Walker when they just drafted those two guys as well. So it's almost like, are they ready to move on from a guy who's been a little bit injury prone? So I think it's more like that. So there are basically, what my point is, there are options out there, but I would give Roschon Johnson a chance to show you what he's got before, really exploring them. I think by the end of training camp and end of preseason, you'll kind of know. And that's when maybe a Jamal Williams or a Devin Singletary, one of those, vets might come in at that point, but I don't think they're in any rush to upgrade that position.
Well, I mean, let's play a couple hypothetical scenarios here. Let's just say Kenneth Walker does hit the free agent market next year in 2026. Let's just say the Bears don't trade for him now. Are you taking the flyer on a guy on him with like a 1-year deal, like a Najee Harris type contract, and bringing him in and hoping that he's able to magically, he's been good, but magically get healthy again and then just sort of figure everything out?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what he does this year, obviously, but let's just pretend he has a similar year this year as he did last year, and then he's a free agent. I would absolutely take a chance on him on like a 1-year contract like that, depending on, what the Bears do in the draft, who else is available and everything like that. But I think he would, because he's a good running back when healthy. I don't think there's any debate there. When he's healthy, he's a really good running back. So if you're just giving him a 1-year flyer, I'd absolutely take that chance on a Kenneth Walker. Where I hesitate is trading for him and then also giving, because if you trade for him, you're not going to sign him to a 1-year extension. You're going to sign him to a long-term extension. That's where I question that a little bit.
Well, I mean, the other big thing here is this: if we look at Kenneth Walker, he is the David Montgomery in this offense is effectively what he is, right? It's weird because like David Montgomery and Jamal Williams, I feel like because I think they were together for a year in Detroit, right? Or no, they were not. It's David Montgomery plus Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, that have been together for the last couple of years. What makes this running game click in this offense is obviously going to be that Jahmyr Gibbs type piece. And you really wonder if, setting realistic expectations here, the Bears are probably not going to be able to acquire that Jahmyr Gibbs type piece this year. They are probably going to have to wait another year to get that, which I think is completely okay, because if you look at Ben Johnson's offense, I mean, it took time for them to kind of build this thing up from 22 to 23, ultimately kind of reached its peak the last couple of years, irrespective of how his time in Detroit ended, but it's still been a really damn good offense. I think that sort of translates to another really big talking point where we mentioned Ryan Poles earlier, and now it's time to kind of bring the, I guess, esteemed general manager, if we want to term it, back into the conversation, to where he spent 4 years building up this roster. Every single time someone in the media room at Halas asks him, like, hey, is this the team that's going to put you over the top? Do you finally feel like your roster building is complete? Because it's an annual question that I feel like it's asked, that intro to training camp sort of presser, that introductory presser to training camp. And Ryan is always just like, well, we're always trying to get better, blah, 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 right? There's times I feel like he gives a lot of Ryan Pace type answers, but you get Ryan Poles here, I think the pressure finally has to be on for him to start producing. And the reason being is because he's out of excuses, right? The excuse of, well, he walked into a situation where there was a bad roster, aging roster, no cap space at all. That excuse is gone. Justin Fields, who was not necessarily his quarterback, is no longer in the picture. That excuse is gone. He's had a handful of years of top 10 picks at this point. He's had a handful of years of top 100 picks at this point as well. I think 11 inside the top 100. And so now you kind of look at some point, and he's hired a second head coach. At some point, I think everything has to start coming to fruition here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got to be feeling the pressure. I mean, we talked about on the last podcast, the chances of the Bears going from worst to first, and we talked about that because every year there's a team that goes worst to first. In the NFL, the Bears have not even come close to that in Ryan Poles' 3 years. He's 15-36. Since taking over, that's a 294 winning percentage. And everything like you said, he's hired now 2 head coaches. He has his quarterback. There can't be any more excuses. The Bears have to win some games this year. They don't have to win the Super Bowl. They just have to win some games. And I think also another part of this is public perception really matters, and how you win those games matters as well. Let's say, if the Bears go 9-8, it's not great, but and it's an improvement, but Caleb Williams really breaks out. He's really gelling with Ben Johnson. Offense is putting up points, but maybe the defense is struggling a little bit. I think that's a fine year for Ryan Poles. If they go 9-8, but Caleb Williams struggles, Ben Johnson maybe doesn't adjust, and the defense kind of wins you some games there, I think that's not a good season, for the Bears. I think Ryan Poles would feel the pressure there too, because he's invested, he's tied to Caleb Williams and he's tied to Ben Johnson more than he is the defense. So if those guys don't really take the next step, I think Ryan Poles feels the pressure even more, even if the win total is the same in those scenarios.
I mean, that is a really good point. So what you're saying is now we're going to have to put a poll out on Twitter from the Halas Beat Twitter account, which is, would you rather go 9-8, but Caleb Williams has a damn good year and takes a step forward? Or would you go 9-8, but it's a classic Bears 9-8 where it's kind of the defense leading the way? That is, most people would probably pick the Caleb Williams scenario, but the problem I think this year is that the schedule is also just incredibly tough, where going back to how we opened the show up, this isn't 2018 all over again, irrespective of some of the similarities. And the big reason being is because this is a team that is, number one, the schedule is tougher. Number two, that 2018 team, they were in a very different spot because they had that sort of all-pro elite edge rusher in Khalil Mack, number one, but then the schedule that year was significantly easier, right? There was a point where I think they rattled off 7 to 8 straight wins, and they're probably not going to win 7 to 8 straight this year, but I guess we'll just have to see. The other part of this whole Ryan Poles, I think, conversation clearly has to be, I don't know how much 1920 Football Drive you watch, but there seems to definitely be a lot of influence that guys like Ian Cunningham have on what this team is able to go ahead and do, and ultimately I think what this team is doing. So, as much as I think the pressure's on Ryan Poles, I'd even say that for a guy like Ian Cunningham, who's interviewed for GM jobs year in and year out, kind of part of it is he hasn't gotten the gigs. The other part of it, he's kind of just like, you know what, I'm going to go back to wherever it is, to Chicago, because I didn't like the situation and the setup and all of that stuff. I think that maybe this is the year that teams finally start to take notice and say, hey, Ian Cunningham put his stamp on what the Bears have built over the last 4 years. Maybe he's a guy that's finally ready as well for a legitimate shot at being GM.
Yeah, and I think the fact that Ian Cunningham hasn't gotten a job, as a GM these last couple cycles, despite being a hot name there, kind of speaks to what the league kind of feels about what the job that Ryan Poles and by extension Ian Cunningham has done. If the league thought that Ryan Poles was doing great and there was no pressure on him, then I think Ian Cunningham would have a job. But I think there's some skepticism there by the other teams about exactly what the Bears are doing behind the scenes. We'll see what happens this year. I think they're heading in the right direction. Absolutely, with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, but they have to start proving it on the field. There's only so many theoretical things we can talk about. If it's week 8 and we're talking about theoretical changes they can make in the offseason, that's not good. We got to start talking about the actual games as much during the season as much as we're talking about the offseason. It's time, in year 4 of Ryan Poles, I believe, it's time to start taking things seriously. They should absolutely be in playoff contention. In my mind, they do not have to make the playoffs, but they have to be in contention week 16, 17, making a run for it. But we'll see.
See, what's weird is this, as we kind of start to wrap up the show here, is that it's like you hired Ryan Pace. Just looking at the last 10 years of the franchise, right? That's really modern Bears football to me at this point. But you hired Ryan Pace because he was this sort of rising young executive in the Saints organization, and he ended up being a guy that, ended up being a flop in the end, right? Irrespective of one season, okay? Then you go ahead and you hire Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham, both guys that which when the Bears hired Ryan Pace, I should say the Saints were a respected organization around the league, even though they went 7-9 for 3 straight seasons. I think after winning that Super Bowl with Drew Brees. But again, Ryan Pace, still respected exec around the league. Then you go ahead and you hire Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham coming over from Philly and KC, 2 of the better sort of organizations in the league. Ian Cunningham obviously was in Baltimore too, one of the best organizations, if not the top organization in the league. But he was always even in the front office, both Poles and Cunningham were kind of these background. They were president, but they were in the background. Let's just call it how it is. And so now you see they're getting their shot. And to your point, maybe the league is not as high on what the Bears are doing because they are banking on Caleb Williams taking that next step forward. And ultimately, the reputation of Poles and Cunningham rests on the ability to make sure that they get the hire right with Ben Johnson. They go ahead and they get the quarterback right with Caleb Williams. Because if not, then we're in a situation to where this team is starting over 3 years, 2 years at this point, 2 to 3 years down the line, they're going to be starting over again, and the cycle is going to continue, which, again, me being we were texting in the, my buddies and I got a group chat, and we were texting today about the Bears, and I was just like, listen, the only way to never be disappointed with this team is to not have any expectations at all and just be so sort of pessimistic about them to the point where when they do something good, you're like, all right, cool, but when they do something bad, you're just like, all right, cool, well, I kind of expected this to happen anyway, so it's all a process, obviously. I think we're going to go ahead and see, but rounding it out here, I think the Bears got to make the playoffs this year for the seat to remain cool and for it to not start sizzling, and that making the playoffs has to be on the heels of Caleb Williams' development.
See, I disagree. I think they need to just be, this is, as we talked about last time, this is a tough division. They need to be in contention and serious contention, not, third in the division all year. They need to be, if they miss the playoffs by a game, but Caleb Williams takes the next step, kind of like I said, if they win 11 games or 10, 11 games and somehow miss the playoffs, but Caleb Williams looks like the real deal, Ben Johnson has the offense humming, I see that as a successful year. Is it going to make the hot Ryan Poles seat safe? No, absolutely not. But I still view it as a successful year and something to build on from there. Because if you win 10, 11 games and you'd miss the playoffs just because other teams won a lot of games, that's a nice stepping stone season. In the next year, I kind of would view it as, to make a Cubs analogy, because I'm a Cubs fan, the 2015 Cubs where they really took a next step, they didn't win it, and then the next year they were the best team in football. That's how I kind of view this year. I want to see. We need to see wins, but we don't need to see 12, 13 wins. I think 10, 11, 9, even potentially 9 wins, but most likely 10, 11 wins makes a successful season.
It's going to be something that we have to see as we get closer to training camp here. Make sure you guys are keeping it locked into the Bear Report YouTube channel. Like, comment, subscribe on this video. Make sure you guys are subscribing to the channel. Anything that you guys want to see us discuss, make sure to DM me on Twitter, DM the Halas Beat account on Twitter at Halas Beat. Leave a comment below. We will certainly try to discuss all that stuff. Make sure you're following myself and Steve on Twitter at Usayd Koshul and at CFC Bears. We are going to be back next week with just one episode because the rest of the week I am out of town and traveling, which is going to make for a very interesting 3 to 4 day trip. And then after that, that's it. Training camp is here and the 2025 season will begin. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, bear down and have a great end to the week and an even better weekend.